good evening, place as usual. Today I'm going to talk about defending a claim and how to find and use evidence for an AP literature prompt. So fun times today. So essay stuff. Woohoo. But as usual, I'm going to give the plug for Fiveable because that's what we do here. So if you're not following us at Think Fiveable on the Twitter, the Instagram, and the YouTubes, do it. You might as well. It's free, and you get to know all the stuff, and you get it scheduled, and you never miss a stream, and it's just fantastic. And if you're not already subscribed to Fiveable and you want to see these streams again, or you want to see past streams that I might refer to or other streamers might refer to, you're going to want to go to Fiveable and sign up. It is so cheap. It does not cost you hardly anything. It is awesome. But let's talk today about defending a claim. All right, here's what we're doing today. So I'm going to talk about reading and annotation tasks. I'm going to kind of review just a little bit because the last time I was on here about 2 weeks ago, I talked about how to actually read a prompt. I'm not going to go into much detail with that, but just like a review. But then also talking about how to annotate and what you should be annotating for. Talk about forming a claim. I will use the word claim and thesis interchangeably. So if some of you probably learned the word claim, I always taught it as thesis, and I know that students learn 2 different ways. So that's what I'm talking about here. You can't hear me? Try closing it and then coming back because other people can. And then come on back. We'll still be here. We will talk about reading for question types. So I'll talk about Q1, Q2, Q3 as usual, because there's 3 different ones, and Q3 is a little bit different looking for evidence. And then we'll do some examples, and then we'll talk about explaining your evidence and how to do that effectively. But mostly today, we're going to talk about what kinds of evidence to pull out, how to organize that evidence, and how to actually look for it. So hello, hello. Welcome, those of you just coming in. Fantastic. All right, I got some questions for you. So I already said what a claim was. I already answered my own question. Fantastic. What do you actually need to know? So you get a prompt, and we're going to go over this. If you're still kind of confused, that's okay. But what do you need to know in order to make a claim? To be able to write your thesis statement, and you get that prompt, what do you personally need to know? And that's for you. Yeah. So it's almost always going to ask you about literary devices. What else do you need to know? Yeah, the main idea of whatever you are reading. If you don't understand what you're reading, and I'll say this at least probably 5 times in this stream today, if you don't understand what you're actually reading, then you can't analyze it at the college level. That's just common sense. But also, that's just something to know, that your main task is to find out what the heck you're reading. Anything else you need to know? And this may be weird to answer to because you don't have a prompt in front of you currently. We'll look at some samples today. While I'm waiting to see if anyone else has an answer too, I meant to say that at the bottom of your screen, if you have not been with us before, there is an Ask a Question button at the bottom. So if at any point today you have a burning question that you must have answered, or like I'm in the middle of talking and you really want something, it could be on the topic there, it might be explained later on. Hit that Ask a Question button, type in your question, and I will get to it. I answer all the questions. You can also type it into the chat, and I will happily add it to Ask a Question, and I will answer it at some point. So if I don't get to your question immediately, don't worry, I will eventually. It just might actually come up later in the live stream. Okay, yeah. So the major things you probably need to know are the kinds of literary devices being used and the main idea of your text. You also need to know, and I explained this last time, is the meaning and the deeper meaning of what you're actually reading. So that goes with main idea as well. So then back to this, so back to Ask a Question, and you can put this in the Ask a Question box. Any questions throughout this stream too right now and later on, what questions do you have about making claims on the AP exam or making a thesis statement? And then also, what questions do you have about finding evidence for a claim? So this is tailored to y'all. I have a whole plan here, but if y'all have questions that go beyond what I'm doing, I'm going to answer them today too. So feel free to ask questions throughout. Please, please, I love questions. They are my favorite. So think about that questions throughout what you have for making claims. But I'm going to move on. That'll still be there. You still got the question box. All right, here we go. Let's talk about your task when you get a prompt. So this is the review from the last time I was here. So you get a prompt in front of you. And after your heart stops beating really fast, you're like, oh my gosh, I have 3 of these to do. Calm down, breathe, and here's what you do. So obviously you have to read the prompt. It's okay. You should figure out what the questions are being asked. And I always suggest you write those questions down. So you turn the statements into questions that they're saying, like they'll say, write an essay on that analyzes the following things. So you write a question that might say, what is the relationship between the father and the son in this play? Like I just said that. You want to read and annotate the text for meaning. So I'll talk a little bit about annotation in just a second. You're going to gather evidence to support your response. Also going to talk about that. That's today's live stream, obviously. Write a thesis. I won't talk a lot today about the actual wording of thesis statements because I believe we also had a live stream about that last week. But I'm talking more about figuring out the gist of your claim and then getting the evidence from your text and how to look at that. So today's not heavy on wording of a thesis. And then write your essay, obviously, and then check it over. So that's the review from last time. Now, don't you like that picture? It's terrifying. Google is kind of terrifying sometimes. You type in cat and that's what comes up. Anyway, I got a prompt, and this might be the feeling that you have inside of you. Like, oh God, here's the prompt. I read it. I did all those things. I annotated it. I answered questions. Now what do I do? All right, so you're going to read and annotate the text for understanding. So this is what we said before. In order to be able to come up with a thesis, you got to understand what you're reading. So make that priority one, understanding. And you probably don't have to be told that in order to do that, you have to understand it. But some people will try to skip that step and try to find like, whoa, let's dig down into those literary devices. Don't do that yet. Go through the text and annotate for understanding. People annotate in different ways, but if you're not annotating, you really, really should be, because you are, at this point, it doesn't stick in your head generally. Like, you want to go back, like you're doing so many things at one time when you take the exam, that writing notes to yourself is a favor to you. When I annotate for understanding, all I'm doing is putting, like, let's say I'm annotating a poem. All I'm doing on the side of each stanza is writing like a summary of what I'm reading. So in my own words, what the heck's happening? Or if I'm reading a prose piece, that's the same thing that I'm doing. I'm just basically writing these things. And I'm not just doing this for the essays, I'm also doing this for the multiple choice. So this also helps with finding evidence to answer multiple choice questions. So make sure you're annotating. Don't skip that step. It doesn't have to take long. It's just something you should do. Then, you always want to read something more than once. Yes, you do have time to read it more than once. You don't have time to read it like 40 times, and you don't have time to read it really slowly, but you have time to go through it at least twice, and ideally more than that, since it's fairly short. But you want to read and annotate for what the questions are specifically asking. So now that you've got the understanding part, now you're going to try to answer the question. Or the questions. There's always more than one question. So this includes finding deeper meaning and overall meaning from the text, but also the actual question itself. And we'll do, again, a practice prompt to actually see what this looks like. So the example I'm going to use the whole time, because the poem we're going to read is about father-son relationships. So I'm going to probably mention that many times, like, what is the complex relationship between the father and son? So, so that's the question that you might be answering in the when you're looking for evidence. Then you want to figure out your claim and thesis statement. So that's my next slide in just a second. So that's figuring that out from the question. And this is when you kind of get your wording down, but you can like clean up the wording later on too. Then you want to pull out your significant evidence for your claim. So notice that I'm having you write a claim before you start finding evidence. Like, you're looking for what those deeper meanings are, and sure, you may like highlight that evidence as you're going. You may do some of that, but you want to get that claim first and then really dig into that evidence. So you pull that out for your claim. So you're kind of doing things simultaneously, and then you're going back and forth a little bit. So there's a list here, but it doesn't have to go through this list exactly as stated. And then, of course, by the end of it, you're explaining how your evidence proves your claim, because that's what you got to do in your essay. I'll go through that more later. So once again, ask questions as you got them. But this is probably stuff that you, or it's maybe, I shouldn't say probably, this may be stuff that you're like, yeah, I know how to do this. But sometimes, if you're like me, you like lists and you like people saying, oh, there's steps that I can take to do this thing. I love step-by-step stuff. Hopefully there's some of you that also like it. All right. Let's talk thesis statement a little bit. Oh, Kitty, you're so cute and smart. All right, cool. So you've gotten past the hard part, which is understanding what the literature says. Like you get the gist of what it has and you're like, cool, I recognize that there's hyperbole in this and cool diction and it's a poem. It's a sonnet. I don't know. You found some cool stuff in it. How do I form a thesis now? I'm looking for my claims. Oh, about the sound. Maybe possible try to restart the computer for the sound, Maria. Let's see what happens. We'll still be here, I promise. We're not going away. Okay, so, and a lot of this looks repetitive because you are annotating more than once and you are reading the text more than once. So if I'm saying like read and annotate, read and annotate, read and annotate, that's because you actually are going through this like multiple times. So how do you form a claim and thesis? You read and annotate the text with the prompt in mind. So thinking about, so I'm going to go back again to that. That's looking for a complex relationship between a father and son. So you're looking for evidence that's gathering pieces that will prove this complex relationship, but you're also figuring that out. My voice is not coming out. Okay. You want to respond to the question specifically and succinctly. Do not, for the love of God, do not just repeat the prompt. We talked about that last time. For multiple reasons, but actually the major reason not to, well, okay, there's two major reasons not to do this. Number one, you're not going to get a good score. One of the big parts of the new rubric is about your thesis statement, and if it's not good, like it's not specific, you're going to lose a lot of points there. But honestly, more importantly there is that when you get a good thesis statement, it helps you write better and it helps you understand. But if you write a thesis statement that just restates the prompt, like there's a complex relationship with the father that is shown through metaphor, simile, and personification, that doesn't help you find out what that complex relationship is. That just repeats what the prompt is saying. So it's not helpful for you. Then you're just kind of going in circles and looking for random pieces of figurative language that may match up to something you haven't thought out. So don't just repeat the prompt. You want to answer the questions that the prompt is asking. What is that complex relationship? What is the author's deeper meaning in this text? So you have to determine that first. Then you want to organize your evidence. So chronological order is generally the most logical. And I'll talk about a pitfall that you don't want to fall into, especially for prose and Q3, but because poetry can go into different directions, like thematically by stanza. Thematic ordering can work too. One of the things you don't want to do, so this is when you've gathered your evidence and this also helps you organize when you're thinking as well. So one pitfall that you don't want to fall into is organizing your paragraph by figurative language type. So you don't want to write a thesis that says the father and the son don't get along very well, and this is shown through hyperbole, simile, and imagery. You don't want to do that for a couple of reasons. And this is something actually I want to know, and I'm going to raise my hand because I've done this before. How many of you have written a thesis statement that does that? You've organized your paragraphs by figurative language or by the types of figurative language that are in there. Yep. Okay, good. So I'm not the only one. I've totally, because that's so natural for a lot of people. Before I actually answer it, why might that not be the best way to do it, to move through something? Why would chronologically be maybe better? Sometimes it's appropriate, but most of the time there's good reason not to do it that way. Let's see if you got anything, and that means type it in the chat. And while you do that, I'm going to see if this question can be answered. Okay. Actually, yes, I will answer this question while I wait for people to say why this might not be the best. So the question is, what is succinctly? Succinctly means you're answering it concisely, as in like is it in as few words as possible, but with like the most correct words. So instead of it's not like a paragraph long sort of thesis statement. If you're doing a succinct thesis, it's using exactly what words need to be said to get your point across in the fewest number of words. So hopefully that answers your question. So more formal for going chronologically. Yeah, I suppose it's less. So yeah, it's less like a middle school essay and more like a college essay. Yeah, I would say that. So doing it that way. I will also, so I'll say that you don't want to do it by figurative language. generally, because number one, when you do it that way, you know, if you go through a poem and you find like 4 metaphors, they tend to be all over the place. So it's like, cool, stanza 1 has one, and then stanza 4 has one, and then, oh, look, stanza 5 has one too. So you kind of confuse both yourself and the reader by moving all over the poem, and then they have to go through and find those metaphors that you're looking for. So that's one reason not to do it. Number two, it comes off more as, it goes with that formality thing. It's like, it's more like the 5-paragraph essay that you wrote in middle school, and you don't want it to look as much like that. It's okay to have 5 paragraphs. It's okay to put it like thesis, body, 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 conclusion. That's okay. But you want to move into the poem because that's naturally how we read, and that's naturally how we go through texts. So moving through it chronologically helps you move through the text and understand it better, helps the reader understand where your thought process is. And when you are moving chronologically, instead of moving like by figurative language, you're moving through a piece of evidence. And I'm going to talk today about this, is pulling multiple things out of the same piece of evidence. So pulling like, this piece of evidence may have a figurative language type. It may also have a really good diction, and it may also have another figurative language type or a different structure. So you're keeping the focus on a particular place instead of a particular type of figurative language, if that makes sense. So it's just better to do it that way. It's just more logical and more mature writing as well. So hopefully I've answered my own question that I asked you. Again, feel free to ask questions. Or if you want something clarified with that, then let me know. So now we'll go through that later. We're going to do that. I'm going to skip that question. All right. So let's talk 3 different types of questions that you're going to have that you are probably very, very familiar with by now. It's October. Happy October. Best month of the year. So we have poetry, prose, theme analysis. There are different things. Some of you look for some of the same things with each of these, but there's some ways that you look at these differently. Like poetry is going to be different from prose a little bit. So the kinds of evidence that you might find in these different types is going to be different. So you're reading and annotating a poem for evidence. You're tearing it apart like the cat's tearing up toilet paper. Haha, I laugh at my own joke. Okay, so this goes for any of them, so this is going to be repeated. So you want to read and mark any contextual information. So if you're lucky enough to get a date or an author in there, congratulations, mark that. Don't leave it. Keep that in mind. So a poem written in 1781 is going to be different from a poem written in 1920. And if you know your history, then you can pull, you don't want to pull too much like contextual history out of it, but you'll have a better idea of what like maybe themes would be prevalent at these times. So that may help you. Or let's say it's a particular author. If you're lucky enough to get an author and you know that author, then you know that they tend to go with these particular themes. One thing is that if there's not an author listed on something, then it's often, it can be one of 2 things. One, it's an author that's really well known and they're not telling you, like Shakespeare. Or 2, it's someone who's so obscure that they've been lost to the annals of history. So that's somewhat helpful and somewhat not helpful, but whatever. When you're looking for a poem, same thing with all of them, you're looking for meaning and understanding. I said I would repeat that like 5 or 6 times, and I'm going to keep repeating it. Look for your understand the poem. For a poem itself, you're looking for meaning in the structure and the tone. Poetry, especially for structure. That's actually my next live stream, is talking about how a structure of a poem creates meaning. But you're looking for things like tone in the diction itself, in the poetic devices that the author uses, that the poet uses, like rhyme, rhythm. You're looking for figurative language. And I already said this, you're looking for structure. So is it a sonnet? Is it a villanelle? How many stanzas does it have? Does it have a rhyme scheme or rhythm scheme? That can help you get tone. That can help you, the particular rhyme scheme can help you see. This is a student of mine actually asked me last year. He said that when the world is the point of finding a rhyme scheme, it doesn't tell me anything about the meaning or the tone. And I kind of laughed, and hopefully you're kind of laughing to yourself internally, or maybe you're not, I don't know, because super English nerd, but hopefully there's some more of you out there. But if you're thinking of like the difference between Dr. Seuss and Drake, you're going to think about 2 different kinds of rhyme that's going on. So a rhyme scheme absolutely does have bearing on the meaning and the tone. So keep that in mind as you are looking at poetry. Okay, oh, that is not the correct screen. All right, here we go. All right, so that's Q1. So those are the things. So specifically looking for like poetic structure things. For Q2, so you're reading a piece for, or a prose piece or a drama piece for evidence. So it could be drama, it could be prose. Same thing. Almost every prose piece is a piece of a, for a Q2, is a piece of a novel, or it's a piece of a play. So they will give you, not always, but pretty often, I don't want to give a percentage because I don't know, but almost every prompt I've seen gives you some context as to where that thing's coming from. So if it's in the middle of a conversation between two dudes, it's going to say, these guys are talking about this person that they just met, and that person may not be in the scene, but they'll explain it to you. Don't ignore the contextual explanation because it helps you. Usually they include that because that helps you understand what's going on, and it probably has to do with the prompt. Same thing with the dates and the explanations and the authors. Don't ignore it. Use it to your advantage. Same thing, look for meaning, understanding, and you're still looking for structure here, but more for prose, you're looking for, like, is it one giant paragraph? Is it several paragraphs? Is it dialogue heavy? Is it description heavy? Is it these kinds of things? So specifically for prose itself. Now, the fun one that people have, so moving on, so keep asking questions if you got them, is a Q3. And this is one that people are like, how the heck do I find evidence for something that's not in front of me? How many of you have that question? How do I use evidence from? Yep, I figured so. This is one that a lot of students have trouble with, and this is where people try to start to go into plot summary. There's going to be more plot talked about for a Q3 than specific lines and whatnot, just because by nature of you're not able to find a Q3. Good, I'm glad there's several of you that do feel this way, because this is how students feel. The way that you're gathering evidence for a play. So I have two suggestions for you, or not two, yeah, two suggestions. So here's ways that you can kind of get around that block, because sometimes you'll get to the test and you're like, I know this book pretty well, and you maybe read it a couple times, but you didn't read it in a way that maybe helps you on the exam. So I have two pieces of advice for you. So one of them is, so before the test, so both of these are before the test, have 3 to 5 books that you know well enough to pull out concrete evidence. So and ideally ones that you like, but sometimes one book that works really well that you hate can work too. I know that I had a student that hates The Great Gatsby. She absolutely despised it, but she's like, I know it's going to work really well for all this stuff. So she used it on the exam. So it doesn't have to be something you love, but that usually is better. So yeah, pull out concrete evidence. Actually so depending on what kind of learner you're, I'm kinesthetic. So what I would do is I would physically write or type out the plot points, because then I would remember them and remember to write them on the exam. If you're auditory, listen to it, record yourself talking, I don't know. And then if you're visual, of course, just go back and read and mark and annotate and find the things like plot points, find tone, find author's purpose, overall meaning. So review those books. No matter how well you know those books, go back and actually pull out evidence that you might be able to use. Q3s do not require quotations. So you don't have to find like actual quotations, but if you can remember things pretty well, like what someone said or a particular sentence, and you can kind of replicate it, you're not going to get penalized for misquoting something that you don't have in front of you. But if you use it and you have like the gist of it, then it's going to look really good instead of summarizing the plot too much. Second piece of advice is if you go to AP Central, if you've never been, I'm going to put it here, AP Central, into the chat. So if you've never been, and you don't have to sign in or anything. You can even type into Google. You can put released AP exams, and they have Q3s and Q1s and Q2s as well, from every exam for like the last 20 years. My suggestion is to practice with available release Q3s and pull out evidence for multiple texts to prove your claims. So it doesn't mean that you need to rewrite. The best way to do it, of course, is to practice writing an essay, but I know y'all don't have time to do all that. You might have time to maybe write one extra essay, especially if it's extra credit, but yeah, y'all are busy. You're doing college applications, you are taking probably multiple AP classes, and you need a life. I get it. You can just pull out evidence from it and just practice writing a thesis statement with those Q3s. So that's some of the good ways to practice and get that. Get a Q3 and be able to pull out evidence from it. If you have further questions about how to pull out evidence from a Q3 that I didn't answer, please ask it. But those are my two major pieces of advice, and that should make you feel more confident about a Q3 as well. Yeah. Hopefully your teacher's not No, hopefully your teacher is letting you use the book and then kind of slowly pulling that, what do you call that? I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of. I'm going to move on. All right, here we go. So let's talk types of evidence. Yay! And then how you can dive deeply into that evidence, like what are you looking for? I talked to like very, very vaguely about which kinds of things you're looking for, but let's actually look into what you can really dig into. We'll look at an example. Actually, we'll try to look at 2 to 3 examples. And then what evidence can you pull to prove your claim, or what can I pull for my evidence to prove my claim? So I call this types of evidence, but it's not really, it's more like I'm going to find a line from my poem or a line from my text, and I'm going to see what I can pull from it. So it's like more like types of things to pull from evidence, not types of evidence. But for the sake of brevity, let's just go with types of evidence. Okay. Haha, cat. So I'm going to categorize this for 4 different categories here. There's probably a lot more. You can put into a million subcategories, but these are the ones that I think of when I'm thinking of what can I pull from a text that I can actually use. Plot summary is not great, but plot sometimes answers a question. So I'll go a little bit about that in just a second. Evidence that points to tone, evidence that points, or structural evidence that points back to tone or meaning, and then language that points back to tone or meaning. So I'll go to those in just a second. For plot, oh man. So you already probably know the plot summary is not great. But sometimes a piece from a poem or a piece from a prose piece is going to prove your point. It's going to be a piece of evidence. What you don't want to do is feel like you have to explain the entire plot of a poem or a story. You can pull out you can just explain what something is happening in one sentence, and what do you call that? You use that as evidence and explain how that goes back to your thesis. So as long as you're doing that, it is okay to use plot in order to prove a claim. What you just don't want to do is feel like I need to tell this person what this story means. Like don't do that, or tell them what the story is, because they already know what it is. And we'll do an example of that with the poem, finding a plot piece. Ooh, I have a question. Let's find out what it is. Okay, so the question here is, how do we know if we're using plot or plot summary? So I would say when I was reading students' exams that doing plot summary is as if the student is trying to explain the whole story to me. Using plot as like a piece of evidence. So, okay, so my example is, and so I don't know how many people have read this, but I taught Their Eyes Are Watching God last year. And let's say I'm looking for evidence that Janie's husband, Joe Starks, was disrespectful towards her. Plot summary would be me explaining an entire chapter where Janie is interacting with Joe Starks. An example of plot that I would need to explain that would show the disrespect would be a particular scene where I would explain, like, in this scene, Janie is about to give a speech, and her husband disrupts her in front of a crowd, and she's not able to do that speech. So being very brief about the plot generally keeps you from doing too much plot summary, and then just making sure that you are focusing on your thesis and focusing on your claim that you're trying to make. So just trying to be as brief as possible with it. And one of the things also to avoid, or that helps you avoid doing plot summary, is to, if you're going to point out a plot piece, pull out as much stuff as you can from that particular piece. So if you're going to pull out plot, pull out figurative language too that proves your point. Pull out diction that proves your point. Pull out other things so it doesn't look like you're just looking at that piece for plot. That makes sense. So I think I answered that, but if I didn't, as always, ask it again. Wonderful. Yeah, I know that one of the big questions that people have, and I remember last time, is like, you see those examples of previous tests, like I'm sure your teacher has shown you, or you have seen examples of like 8s and 9s from last year, and it looks like they use a lot of plot summary. There's a fine line, unfortunately, but again, making sure that those things tie really, really tightly to your thesis helps prevent you from doing too much plot summary. And it's going to happen on a Q3. You're going to summarize what's happening, but make sure it's just connected to your thesis. Okay, but keep them coming. Ask. If I move on and you still have a question about plot, keep on asking. I will get to it. All right, but let's move to tone. Tonal evidence. All right, so I'm trying to prove tone. I'm trying to prove that this poem has a dark tone, or has a lighthearted tone, or has a sarcastic tone. I can use lots of things, and so this kind of stuff, like plot can sometimes prove tone, but plot usually just proves like that's the other thing, is like using plot doesn't prove a tone. It doesn't prove a lot of stuff. So that's why you don't generally use it too. But using structure to prove tone, using what is the word? Figurative language to prove tone as well, and diction. Anyway, you can use syntactic structures to determine a tone. So you can, and I'll talk about syntax in just a moment, because I love syntax. If you've been with me before, you know I always smile when I talk about syntax. It's great. It's fantastic. Some of you probably hate it. You shouldn't, though. You use it on a daily basis. You can use, always, you can use diction to show tone. So you can pull things to, particular words that show a tone. So if you're using things like stormy or angry, things that show a dark tone are things that are going to make you feel like something is in a dark versus light place. I always tell my students to look for irony. So when you're looking for tone, yes, I actually say assume that something is ironic, but you're looking for, like, kind of assume it, but assume it with an intelligent brain. So ways to look for irony is one of the hardest things for people to understand in text, and a lot of people don't even understand it, do not understand it when it's even spoken aloud. Our brains are really tied to like people being very direct at us, and irony is the opposite of being direct. So it's really hard to tell that in a text. How many of you have trouble with irony in a text? I know that especially when something's really old, like sometimes when I first read Jonathan Swift, I was horrified. And then when I found out it was ironic, it took me a little bit. So anyone have trouble with irony? You might not. Maybe you watch a lot of late night stuff. Okay, good. I was like, somebody has to have trouble with irony. I like honesty. Some of you are probably being shy. You're like, I don't want to tell anyone I have trouble with it. It's okay. I have trouble with it too. Good. Sometimes. Probably you've had the situation where someone is texting you and you don't know whether or not they're being sarcastic. Like, oh, I did not get that. Yeah, sometimes. So it depends. And the more you practice looking for it, the better you get at it too. And the more you are sarcastic, the more you start seeing other people being sarcastic. So some hallmarks just to find irony, just to help you out. These work pretty well. So I call them calling cards. So things like if it's a story, or if it's like an essay, if it's hyperbolic, like it's super exaggerated and seems like, wait a minute, this is super weird, and really, and especially if it's something weird and kind of offsetting or off-putting, like for example, Jonathan Swift writes an entire essay about eating children. That should make people like raise their eyebrow. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? He's exaggerating. If it seems like someone's exaggerating and talking about something horrible, they're hopefully being ironic and they're trying to get you to notice that. They're using hyperbolic diction, like they're using way elevated diction that is not, like someone's writing a poem now in 2019 and they're using like crazy diction from the 1700s. They might be making fun of it. That's not always the case, but that is a calling card of irony. Litotes is understatement. So it's, for example, like someone might say, oh, being burned with fire must have hurt a little bit. And you should raise your eyebrow and say, wait a minute, being burned with fire would hurt a lot. So they're using that kind of figurative language to display like, oh, they're being ironic. Okay. And then sarcasm and ridicule. So if someone's like totally railing on something, like I hate cats so much, they're the worst things, like they might be being ironic too. But sometimes they're being serious as well. I have a question. Oh, the question was, what are litotes? And I just answered that. But litotes is understatement. So it's like hyperbole, but it's not. It's that being burned with fire may have hurt a little bit, or there are maybe a few Starbucks in America. And if you say something like that, like you're making an understatement, you're actually stating the opposite. So you're saying, oh, wait, there's like a million Starbucks in America, which is not hyperbole. Or maybe it is. I don't know if there's a million. Whatever. I wouldn't be surprised. It's a lot of Starbucks. Anyway, irony. Those are their calling cards. So yeah, irony's fun too, once you get it. So that's tone, but we're always talking about tone. So you like my cat structure? It's beautiful. I didn't make it. All right, structural evidence. So syntax. Syntax can point to tone. And everyone looks at syntax and they say, what's that? If you've been with me before, you already know what syntax is. But it's also here. Syntax is the way words or phrases are ordered in a sentence. It sounds terrifying and it's really not. It's just the way that you order stuff. It's the way that you may say a subject, an object, and a verb, and you might say the object first. You might say the subject first. You might use a lot of ands in your sentence. You might use a lot of punctuation in it. So that's what syntax does. And so syntax points to tone. I'll just put all the bullets up there. Syntax can also point to meaning as well, but mostly tone. I'll give you another example of syntax. So a piece of writing that relies on simple sentences, like declarative sentences. So sentences like, I have a cat. Cats are on my brain today because it's in my PowerPoint, I guess. Or I ate a cheeseburger today. That's a declarative sentence. It's something that's very direct and there's no ambiguity as to what happened in the sentence. I ate a cheeseburger. I have a cat. Someone who uses a lot of declarative sentences is going to have a direct tone because a declarative sentence is direct. Versus another type of syntax is interrogative, which is a fancy way of saying they ask a lot of questions. Someone who uses a lot of interrogative sentences in their piece is questioning, has a questioning tone, or has like an uncertain tone, perhaps, or an interrogative tone. Interrogative, I don't know why I said interrogative. Yeah. Or if you want to learn a fancy thing, I'm going to type it in here. So there's something called Polysyndeton. Some of you might know it. I'm going to spell it wrong. Oh gosh. There it is. Polysyndeton and Asyndeton, which are fancy. Fancy ways to say polysyndeton is someone who uses a lot of ands, and asyndeton is someone who uses no ands or no conjunctions. So someone who uses polysyndeton and says like, I ate cheeseburgers and I ate hamburger and pizza and macaroni and cheese and kale, and they're listing all that stuff, they may have a childlike tone. Versus someone who uses asyndeton, like I came, I saw, I conquered, is like Caesar, and they're really confident and they're really direct. So that's the way you use syntax to find out tone. Let's see my questions, what we got here. Oh, yes. Okay, I will go back to that. Actually, no, I'll do that now. So the question is, do you recommend mentioning syntax in the AP exam? I heard it was a little difficult to do so. Yes, if you feel comfortable using syntax, and this is why I always explain syntax in my live streams, and I explain syntax to my kids. We would do syntax exercises, like every day we'd have a different type of syntax we're working with. If you're comfortable with it and you can say, oh, I noticed that there's a lot of declarative syntax in this sentence. Yes, it does elevate your writing, because instead of just using, oh, there's a lot of metaphors in here. That's great that you know that, but if you're using syntax, it helps you understand tone. It is difficult to do for people who are, there's syntax in everything you do, so you already do it. It's just using that term, syntax. It can be difficult to do well if you're not used to doing it. So it's October. You have lots of time to use syntax and learn to look at different types of syntax. Maybe I would love to do a whole live stream on syntax so you would be prepared to use it and how to use it. But a simple way, again, to do it is if you notice that someone's using the same type of sentence over and over again, is to say their syntax is very direct, or their syntax is very repetitive. So it takes practice, but it is something that students in the past have had trouble with. So I'll say both of those things. But yes, use it. Absolutely. Okay. Structural evidence. So I'll just keep moving on. Got questions about syntax? Ask them. Types of poems you look at, again, if you know it's a sonnet, and again, I'll be here in 2 weeks talking about sonnets and villanelles, so come back and see me. And other form poems, if you know how those form poems are structured, they have very specific meanings that are in those structures that will help you understand it and help you explain what's going on. And then, of course, if you're looking at dialogue versus description, so you have to look at people talking to each other, like their tone's going to come through their words that they're saying to someone versus the description of the person, and story, prose versus drama. I'll just move on from that. Okay, where am I at? Oh, structures can board to all meaning and tone. I already said that. Neat. And then there's language, which is figurative language, which is the thing that you're used to doing. So I'm not saying don't use figurative language, because if you're with me last time, of course you're going to use figurative language or literary devices. You're going to have to use those. Every question asks you about literary devices. So you have to use it. Haha, you're not getting out of it. Ooh, I have a question. I will answer it after this. Beautiful. Actually, no, I'll answer it now. So let's go back. I always do that. So I was asked a question, what is a villanelle? So I won't go into too much detail, but a villanelle is a type of poem that is done in tercets. So the tercet is a stanza of 3 lines, and the last one is a quartet. I don't want to call it a quartet. I can't remember what it's called. A quatrain. There we go. That's a stanza of 4 lines, and it has a specific rhyme scheme, and it repeats the same words. So a villanelle, by repeating the same words over and over, or repeating the same phrases, repeats a particular theme. So that's where that's the short answer for villanelle, but it's just a specific type of poem. They're really cool. Probably the most famous one is the Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. So if you haven't read that one, do it. It's really cool. And I got another question. You are welcome. And the question is, are they a common type of poem? They are a common type of poem in general. They are not, I don't see them on the AP exam particularly often. You know what I do see really often is a sonnet. And I love the sonnet. And the sonnet is structurally is great for looking for meaning. So I'll talk sonnets a little bit today, but mostly the next time I see you. Yeah, so villanelles are fairly common, but not as common as sonnets. Good questions, y'all. I love it. All right, so figurative language. So like tying, you are welcome, as always. So figurative language, as always, you are not just mentioning that something is a metaphor, something is symbolic, something is whatever. You are tying that to the overall meaning in your thesis. So if you mention that it's a metaphor, that metaphor better prove your thesis statement. Or if you're looking for sound devices, same thing. Don't just point out this poem has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B. Like this poem has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, which simulates a song-like rhythm that points to this tone that is song-like because this person's writing about, for example, there is a poem called My Papa's Waltz. And if you look at the rhythm of it, it actually goes in 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if you point out that rhythm, you would say this poem is written in trimeter, excuse me. So 3 beats at a time, like a waltz. So it's doing a rhythm that mimics its title. So that's how you use like rhythm or sound devices to be able to prove a point. I don't know where you're proving the point about the title, but anyway, that's just the way to do it. Don't just point it out, use it to your advantage. And then diction ties to tone and meaning. So y'all know how, well, use diction if you're not doing it. Pull out that word choice in case you don't remember what diction is. It's okay. It's a lot of stuff, a lot of words y'all doing. Okay. So general takeaways from all this. Why am I talking about this? So what I want you to do is make sure that you are focusing, when you're looking for evidence, instead of trying to find a million pieces to describe one thing, try to find really, really good pieces of evidence that do multiple things, that work for you in multiple ways. So again, that goes back to I found a piece of plot that can go to my, that can prove my thesis. Find something that will show you plot. It'll show you some cool syntactical structure. It'll show you figurative language. Almost an example in a poem will do multiple things with you, and I will do an example in a moment. So focus on quality of evidence, not quantity. You could even structure your essay to be each paragraph is focusing on one piece of really strong evidence, or maybe 2 pieces of really strong related evidence. Like it could be like stanza 1 is paragraph 1, stanza 2 is paragraph 2, stanza 3 is paragraph 3, or this piece, this piece, this piece. You can pull a lot from one piece of evidence, and that is okay. So you don't have to find a million pieces of evidence to prove a point. But it'd be better for you to explain a piece of evidence really, really well and look into it deeply rather than just kind of trying to get the surface. I already said this. Organize your essay by chronology or theme, not evidence type. So don't do it like metaphor, simile. Try it next time. When you have an essay, try to do it in a way that's not ordering it that way, and see how you feel about it. You'll probably find that your essay makes more sense, that you find the flow better, and your teacher is probably going to find the flow better. And your teacher can help you with that too. I have a lovely question here, and I love it. It's fantastic. So the question is, what if the literary devices are in the beginning and end? So like, okay, I guess I need clarification you can put in the chat, but so literary devices, like there's a metaphor at the beginning and a metaphor at the end, or oh my god, my light is doing some crazy stuff. Nope, y'all are gonna have a light show today. I don't know what's going on with it. Okay, so let's say that, yeah, so this is the reason why you don't want to organize it by metaphor. You want to organize your essay by, so you can always, so let's say you have a metaphor in the beginning and metaphor at the end, but they're still proving, all the evidence that you're pulling out is still proving your thesis statement. So you don't want to just pull out a metaphor because it's a metaphor. So let's say both of your metaphors point out this thing. If you're moving through it chronologically, you can use that same piece of evidence to point out, like, the first metaphor in your first paragraph and use it to point out, okay, the metaphor explains the thesis, so does the syntactic structure of this example, so does the diction of this example points out the tone that points out this. Then you move on, and by the time it's your last paragraph, you don't have to put the two metaphors in the same paragraph. You can say, you can mention metaphor again in another paragraph. It's okay to do that. You don't have to put all your metaphors into one paragraph. Hopefully that helps, because I think that's one of the things, like, we feel like we have to organize everything, but we can't possibly organize everything. Like, you can't do it chronologically and by literary device. My suggestion is to do it chronologically and not by literary device. Hopefully that makes sense. You are welcome. Sometimes my brain like jumbles things up, and I'm hoping that I answer all your questions succinctly. There's that word again. Okay. Very good questions. Love it. This is make your evidence work for you. So this is what I said about quality, not quantity. Pull as much meaning that relates to your claim as you can from a piece of evidence. Now notice that parentheses that says that relates to your claim. I am sure you have been in this situation in class where you are discussing something and everyone seems to be pulling out every single possible thing they can out of a piece of evidence or paragraph or stanza. And if you're like me, you would sit there and fume, like, can we please move on to something else? You can say yes or give me a thumbs up if you've ever been in that. Oh, yes, 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 yes. I hope that like half of you are rolling your eyes right now, like, oh my God, yes. And half of you are like, I'm that person who does that. I don't know. But you don't have to do that. You make your evidence work for you. Just pull out the stuff from the evidence that actually is going to your thesis statement. You can talk about it the same sentence forever, but if it doesn't have to do with your thesis, then don't point it out. If the rhyme scheme has nothing to do with what you're talking about, don't point out the rhyme scheme. Don't do it. Just make it work for you. So those are the takeaways. Okay, let's do a couple of sample prompts. Not too, we won't spend too long on it. I want to do I think we have time for a Q1 and a Q3. And just for like, the Q3 will be a brainstorming activity for y'all. But let's actually like put this to the test. Okay, so this poem you may have seen before. Actually, how many of you have? Has anyone seen this before? Give me a shout out if you have. I'll just keep talking and I might answer this question. Let's see. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to know it. As you were answering, question is, as evidence, can I use a personal anecdote? For literary, so I think for AP Lang, that usually works, but for AP Literature, generally, personal anecdotes don't really work. You want to stick to writing about the piece at hand. If you can think of a specific time when you're like, no, this totally would work, let me know, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that a personal anecdote would be better than using a piece of evidence from the text. So ask again if you got another question. Okay, good. So you haven't seen this before. Beautiful. That's fine. That's what's going to happen on the exam. If you see the poem and you actually know it, I high five to you. Okay, so, and this isn't about today about like, oh my God, I'm going to explain the poem so we can just move through finding evidence for it. But this is a poem written not recently, but within the last, I think, 70 years. So recently, like as in more recently than Shakespeare. I almost put a Shakespeare on here. I'll do that next time. Aha. So your prompt. The same stuff that you always say, read the poem carefully, then considering such elements as imagery, figurative language, and tone. Remember, you don't have to use those three, but if they point them out, then use them if you can recognize it. So here's your prompt. Write a well-organized essay in which you analyze the complex relationship between the speaker and his father. So what are you looking for? What is the question that you're answering here? Major question. And type that in the chat. What are you looking for in this prompt before you even start reading the essay or poem? Start writing your essay is what I meant. All right, you are looking for literary devices. What big fat question are you looking for? Yeah, you're gonna look for literary devices to answer the big fat question. What is the big fat question? Yes. So the big fat question is, what is the complex relationship between the speaker and his father? So you got to figure that out. What is what's the complexity? And we talked a little bit about complexity last time. Like complexity in this case is like you expect a father to act like one way and he acts like another way. So this is the case in this poem. So you would explain what the complex relationship is happening here. So I'll read it out loud to you because it's a fun poem. Actually, it's not fun, but it's a really cool poem. And it is, all poetry is really meant to be read out loud. So, and then we're looking for evidence that points out to that complex relationship. So those winter Sundays. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold, and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So, what, my friends, is complex about this relationship? What's going on here? And you can tell me about tone. You can tell me what's kind of weird with this relationship, what's kind of off, like makes you raise an eyebrow. Maybe it goes like, oh, that sounds familiar. What's complex? What's going on here? Or you can even just describe, what's this relationship like between the father and the son? Yeah, no one paid attention to the father, it seems. And the father's doing a lot. You can look at some evidence here that's like, it says Sundays too. That's evidence that points out no one paid attention to father or evidence that points out Sundays too, meaning this guy worked every single day of the week, including Sunday. Other evidence that's, we already got that. Yeah, no one paid attention to father. What else? What's the relationship like between the father and the son? Is it, yay, father is great. What's going on? The answer is no, it's not what I just said. Yeah, there's a little bit of fear there. The father works a lot. You can maybe make a case that he's a workaholic if he's working every single day of the week, or maybe that he has to. The family doesn't see that he's not important to the family. The family does not see him as important. Is he important? Is the question. And the answer is, yeah, he's important. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll go back to the son is afraid of his father. There's kind of this fear here. You literally see the word fearing the chronic angers of that house. There's a little bit of fear there. For the sake of, let's see. Now I want to keep the prompt up. So for the sake of also just being able to go through the poem, so if you're looking for tone words in here, actually, let's answer this question first. Let's see what's going on. Okay, yes, good question. So the question is, what does austere mean? Austere means like very, very, so I think it also uses, no, it does not use the word stern. So austere is like, so you may have heard the term, if you haven't, it's okay, austerity measures, and you hear that a lot with like Europe, and that means that you're not giving as much money to somebody and you're holding back from, you're really, really strict and stern. So his love is very austere, means his love is very bare bones. It's like, it's very, I'm going to provide for your physical needs, but I'm not going to hug you. It's kind of sad. So yeah, that's kind of the definition. That's the definition of austere in that context. Good question. So yeah, so then you're pointing out diction like that. If he mentions austere, then that can help you with the tone there. So for the sake of time, we'll point out a couple of different things. So there's a tone of regret and bitterness in this poem because he is afraid of his father a little bit, but this is a man looking back on his what his father did for him in the past and feeling regret on evidence. So if you're I'll go back to that in a second. So he's got regret and bitterness. We'll find evidence to prove that in a second. And then the complexity is that there seems to be different understandings of what it means to show love. Most people when they think of a father figure, and this is the archetypal father figure, someone who gives you advice, someone who is important to the family and provides for the family, someone who is loving, so loving like physically, like I will hug you and I will take care of you, but also providing for needs like this father does too. So he's actually working to make sure that his children stay alive, and really sacrificing too. So those are the things that you look at, but he's not getting that love, that kind of like emotional love back from his dad. So that's where it is complex there. So the question is, how do you find evidence to prove that? Well, if I said the tone is bitter, or let's go with regret, how do you know this guy is regretful about the relationship with his father or about not thanking him? So give me a line. We'll do one and then I'll point out like a couple more of them in there. How do you find that evidence? Yes, when he asked that question, that's like the saddest line in the poem. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So that last line. So this is where you can take a piece of evidence and point out multiple things about it. First of all, that is an example of repetition. So you can use that literary device, say this is an example of repetition, and you wouldn't just say it's repetition, you'd say he uses repetition to emphasize his regret. What did I know? What I did not know that he was actually loving me. So that's how you use that to your advantage. You can use it as point out diction in here again. So you're looking at the whole line. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Point out the diction of austere and lonely. So that is the regret that my father was lonely and I didn't notice it. His austere does not mean cruel. Austere means that you are still providing for somebody, but it's holding back. So using diction in those lines, using the figurative language of those lines, you can even use there's the syntax, there you go. Repetition is part of syntax as well. So that's how you can point out regret. Let's see, other stuff that would point out regret is, I would say the line there that says, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold. So you can point out lots of things with that as well, as in that's split up from the other stanza. So you can point out structural stuff, like why isn't it connected with fearing the chronic angers of that house? Why did he decide to split up the stanza that way? Because maybe he wanted the reader to see that speaking indifferently towards him and who had driven out the cold, making the reader focus on, oh, it was me who was not loving, it was my father who actually was. So structuring the way that you order your words helps you understand a tone and understand what this author is actually going for. It's not talking about a cruel father. He's talking about that he regrets that his father worked hard for him and he never thanked him. Not the happiest poem ever, but hopefully you're seeing how you can make evidence work for you in multiple ways. So you don't have to feel like, I know, not just kind of sad. It's like, but every time I read this poem, I'm like, oh, and then I want to go hug my dad. So go hug your dad after this and go tell him a thank you. Same, that's right. Seriously, go thank your dad after this. I should call him and thank him. All right. We will not do George Bernard Shaw, but that's a good one too. So this is kind of a brainstorming for the last part of this. What books could you use for, this is a prompt from a previous exam. So you could think about this for like takeaways, and then I'll give you the last things, and then we'll wrap up for the night. Oops, not yet. Go back. There we go. So this is a prompt from before. So a symbol is an object, action, or event that represents something or something or that creates a range of associations beyond itself. In literary works, a symbol can express an idea, clarify meaning, or enlarge literal meaning. And so that's them explaining what in the world it is. Select a novel or play and focusing on one symbol. Write an essay analyzing how that symbol functions in the work and what it reveals about the characters or theme of the work as a whole. So I'm going to answer this question, but while I'm doing that, think about what book you might use for something like that if you saw this prompt. Actually, try to think of more than one book you might use, but you can think of less. Actually, yeah, think of as many books as you can that you're like, oh, that's a really cool symbol that I could use to explain the meaning. So what evidence you could pull from the book, and then what is the meaning of the book as a whole. So, but thinking about what could you possibly use? All right, the question is, a symbol is like a motif, right? A symbol can be a motif, and a motif can be a symbol, but they're not the same thing. Motif is more like a repeat, it's a repeated theme, or so yeah, it's like they're not synonymous, but they are very similar, or they can be each other, if that makes sense. Like even a theme can be part of symbolism, but a symbol is not a theme, if that makes sense. So they're not exactly the same, but they can be each other. Yeah, you were welcome. One example that can work with this, so, and this is just you thinking, but you can also type it in the chat, like what book you might be thinking of right now that has a major symbol in it. One of the ones that people love to use for this is The Great Gatsby, and they love to use that green light at the end of the dock, which would work perfectly well with this. And so you would use that symbol to, yes, the whole Holden's Red Hunting Hat and Catcher in the Rye, absolutely. So you could use that. So what you would do is you would make that, you would find out like one of the major meanings or purposes of the book itself, and tie that symbol to the overall meaning of the book or the characters. So for like Great Gatsby, the green light is the desperation that Gatsby feels. So you have to tie that back into like the theme of, oh, words are not coming to me, but you come up with a succinct theme. It's like the desperation of people, what they do in order to get what they want, something like that. So you think about that. So this is one of the examples that you can get. I have a huge list of them that are I used to give them to my kids for parallel reading. But anyway, you can find examples of Q3s and think about books that would work and come up with evidence. So that's how it works. All right, kiddos. Let's wrap up, and then we will, let's talk about all this. Just as a summary of what's going on. Okay, so explaining your evidence. So actually using this evidence, just making sure, wrapping things up, and I've talked about this before. Whatever evidence you find, you want to make sure you tie it back to the prompt and the overall meaning of the text. So don't just put a piece of evidence there and expect it to explain itself. Just don't do that. You're not going to, I mean, that's not the point. The point is not to point out evidence. The point is to point out evidence to prove a point. So if you're doing that, it's not doing what you're supposed to. One of the things that people that they should do is focus on the hows and the whys, not the what. So this is kind of the same thing. Don't just say it's a metaphor. It is thinking about why the author chooses to use a metaphor over, say, a simile, or why the author chooses to use this syntactical structure over that syntactical structure. So you're thinking about the whys and the how the author chooses to portray this symbol or this theme. And then I'll say it again, do not waste time with plot summary or explaining the context of the evidence. It's usually a waste of time, and it's just filling up space, and you don't want to just fill up space. Unless it is absolutely necessary for your claim to work, such as explaining the context of that example I gave about Janie and Joe Starks, like just very briefly explaining context. But you don't need to explain a book to the reader. Someone's gonna know the book you're talking about. And I see an example about fire used as a symbol to characterize Okonkwo and things fall apart. Absolutely. Yes, so you would, and that's a really good one for that book. So yes, love that book. I'm one of the few people who actually likes that book that I know. I'm sure there's lots of people who like the book. Okay, so those are my things. I think that's it. All right. There are other live streams. We have some like moving around. I'm not sure exactly. I know that we definitely have a live stream for poetry. October's basically poetry month. So if you tune into our live streams on Thursday, you're going to find a poetry theme for our live stream. So I'll be back in, I believe, 3 weeks. So you won't see me for a while, but I'll be back and I'll talk about sonnets and villanelles, and it's going to be a fun time. As usual, if you want to follow me, I don't update my Twitter very much. I know, I'm sorry, I'll be back. I appreciate the sad face. I really like hanging out with y'all. It's really fun. I mean, if you want to tweet me, I'm at Ms. Walbach. As usual, if you want to email me, I'm Laura Walton Teacher. If you got a question about anything, let me know. I check that email pretty frequently. But as usual, it has been wonderful to be with you guys, and hopefully you are having a wonderful, wonderful Friday and weekend, and I will see you next time. You are so welcome. Thank you for hanging out with me. You guys are awesome.